Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Social Studies Academy, where today we are going to finish up the legislative branch in our three-part series on what is the longest branch to cover in our AP Government Revised Exam series. Today, we are going to look at two more functions of Congress, their role in the budget process and their quote-unquote oversight role over the executive branch, including agencies such as the IRS. And then we are going to look at the politics behind congressional policymaking. So we spoke in our last lesson on Congress of what's referred to as the quote-unquote power of the purse in their role of creating taxes. And we are going to continue that today in their authority to approve the federal budget. Recent federal budgets have been averaging around a massive $4.5 trillion. So how did we get to that number? Well, the president and the executive branch produce a budget, and the Congress is in charge of revising and approving that budget, in essence, giving them that power of the purse. However, the president must sign off on the budget, which has been an issue in recent history. So really, the budget is a three-part process. The executive branch has the Office of Management and Budget, or the OMB for short, that produces the budget. Then it is sent to the congressional budget offices and the budget committees in each house where changes are made. And again, it is sent to the president, who can either sign it or veto it. Of course, that's an oversimplified outline of this often very messy process, but one that should suffice for your test. There are two types of spending categories, mandatory and discretionary, which are what they sound like. Mandatory being money that must be spent, and discretionary, they have a choice as to how they're going to spend this money. Mandatory makes up the bulk of government spending on what are known as entitlement programs. These are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and we have to put an ever-rising interest on the national debt into this category because America always pays their debts. That sounds familiar. The majority of discretionary spending is spent on the military, leaving the federal government with a small percentage of what they can actually spend money on. One trend which has become problematic is that for the most part since World War II, the budget or federal spending has been more than what Congress collects in revenues or taxes, creating what's known as a deficit. To offset the difference, the government has been borrowing money, creating our national debt, which is at a record $22 trillion. So what are the sources of revenue for government spending? Well, most of it comes from income taxes on individuals. Then we have what are called payroll taxes, which is when an individual pays into Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid through their paycheck, with the understanding that we will hopefully get much of that money back when we retire. There are also excise taxes, sometimes referred to as sin taxes, on items like gasoline, gambling, tobacco, and alcohol. And finally, corporate income taxes on the earnings from our nation's businesses. So, are we headed for a looming crisis? Well, some would say we are already there. As our average lifespan continues to rise and our population growth decreases compared to what it was in the past, the cost of entitlement programs continue to rise, leaving the government with some hard choices to make, either lower discretionary spending or raising taxes, neither of which are popular ideas for elected officials. The other issue is that the interest on our debt continues to rise, and it will just compound in the future unless something is done. And this has led to showdowns between the president and Congress over the budget in recent decades. Starting in 1976, we have seen 21 government quote-unquote shutdowns because Congress and the president have failed to come to an agreement on the budget. 10 of which were major ones in which federal employees were furloughed or sent home and federal facilities were closed. Many of these fights have been political disputes, but they're usually resolved pretty quickly after a public backlash. So we're going to talk about the role Congress plays in controlling the budget and its role in checking the executive branch, especially the bureaucratic agencies, as far as spending. But make sure you remember the power of the purse as a congressional check on the executive branch. Now let's look at the oversight function or power of Congress, part of which does include the approving of the budget, but it is most often associated with their role of holding committee hearings and investigations. Congress can hold hearings and investigations into departments of the executive branch and even presidents for behavior or actions or spending that seems problematic. Sometimes a select committee is created, and this is a temporary committee formed to investigate a specific issue, such as the Benghazi Committee, which investigated then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's handling of the assassination of one of America's ambassadors in Libya. In the summer of 2019, Special Counsel Robert Mueller was called before the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees to discuss his investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Really, to many, this was more of an investigation of President Trump's role in the investigation process. In fact, both investigations led many to question the political motives behind these two hearings and the oversight process. Which brings us to the role congressional officials are supposed to play in what are referred to as the different types of representation: delegate, trustee, and Politico. And you need to be able to describe these for your AP exam. The delegate model of representation is when an elected official does whatever their constituents want, even if they disagree. In other words, they view their role as a servant of their constituents and must abide by the majority opinion in their district. In contrast, the trustee model of representation, in which a Congress member will vote or make decisions based on their own opinions or what they think is best for their district or the country, even if those might contrast with their constituents. Under the trustee model, the Congress member might feel that their expertise and access to more information than their constituents have makes them a better judge on policy. The Politico model acknowledges the role that politics plays in the decision-making process in Congress. A representative might want to vote a certain way, aka trustee model, but due to political pressure and the need to get reelected, they vote whichever way their constituents or their political party wants them to. And this is a great segue into the politics behind congressional behavior. First and foremost, let's look at getting elected to Congress, and this is dominated by what are called incumbents. Those are representatives that are already serving in Congress who run for re-election, and they are re-elected close to 90% of the time. While this is especially true in the House of Representatives, where many members serve in safe seats that we discussed, created by gerrymandering, and while we see more competition to serve in the Senate, which is the more prestigious and likely to have higher profile candidates, incumbent senators still do win by a huge majority. Incumbents have many advantages over new challengers, including name recognition, fundraising, track record, and services that they supply to their constituents. And incumbents' ability to keep getting reelected is pretty remarkable in spite of Congress having a terrible approval rating in recent years. There has been a backlash against what is known as the quote-unquote Washington insider, that they are out of touch with the American people, and people often perceive them to be corrupt and swayed by corporate interests. In fact, President Trump ran on a pledge to quote-unquote drain the swamp of Washington insiders, and this can create apathy or a lack of interest, as demonstrated by very low voter turnouts in midterm elections. Meanwhile, some would argue that there is a bonus to incumbency, in that it allows Congress members to gain experience and provide stability in Congress. There are paths to defeating incumbents, though. if the economy is bad, or a popular backlash against policies. And we have seen some major swings back and forth between the Democrats and Republicans as to who controls Congress. One major criticism, which gives us a term you need to know for your exam, is pork barrel spending. And this can be another advantage for incumbents. Pork barrel spending is the practice of Congress members who attach what are known as earmarks or riders to bills, basically getting money for projects in their districts that often have nothing to do with a bill. In other words, they are bringing home the bacon to their district. An egregious example of this occurred in 2006 when Congress members from Alaska added an earmark to a spending bill in which almost $400 million were set aside to build a bridge in Alaska that would connect an island of 50 people to the mainland. Dubbed the Bridge to Nowhere, public backlash saw funds removed for this project and created some new rules to limit pork barrel spending. But the practice is still a major issue and continues to be used to gain political support for certain bills. Another practice and term you need to know is logrolling, in which members of Congress will trade votes with each other, either for political coverage or members will trade votes for pork projects with the promise of having that vote reciprocated. Again, this is called logrolling. Another criticism of Congress is that many bills are actually written by lobbyists. These are groups hired by interest groups to persuade Congress members to support their interests, a topic that we will cover in more detail when we get to politics. And this fits with the elite theory of democracy, as many lobbyists are hired by corporate interests to get bills passed with the promise of massive campaign donations. And the thought of lobbyists writing legislation really rubs many Americans the wrong way. We recently discussed how ever since FDR's New Deal program, presidents have played a much bigger role in pushing legislation. And the general public has come to look to presidents to put political pressure on Congress to address issues that our nation is facing. The president has a massive power over legislation with their veto power, which we've talked about a few times in our lesson on checks and balances. But remember, this is a major check on congressional policy, and it is sometimes political. One area we didn't discuss in our lessons on federalism is how states are often referred to as laboratories for national policy, and a place where Congress sometimes will take their lead from. But states can also play a role in going further than Congress does, as the state of California often does, for example, in environmental policy, setting emission standards that are higher than those set by Congress. We've seen states enacting laws that demonstrate the rising political divide we've discussed, and states will continue to put pressure on Congress and the president in policymaking. So, the number one indicator of how a Congress member is going to vote on legislation is what party they belong to. And we've seen party line voting increase in Congress. Many people blame today's highly partisan landscape, which often leads to another term you should know, political gridlock, or an inability to get anything done. This perception that Congress moves too slowly has only increased the public's trend of looking to the president for decisive action. Many people also blame the rise of partisan media for a large shift to the extreme left and right of the political spectrum of members of Congress. And we will do an entire lesson on the media's role in politics. Presidents have not been immune from this rising criticism as well. And as they have played a larger role in promoting legislation, in 22 of the last 26 midterm elections, the president's party has lost seats in Congress. And this leads to what is known as divided government, in which one party controls the White House and the other controls Congress. Or sometimes Congress is divided in half between the two parties. This trend has been more common since the 1970s, and it plays a huge role in the confirmation of the president's appointment power, especially for what are known as lame duck appointments, as the president nears the end of their term. We saw the Republican-controlled Senate refuse to hold hearings on President Obama's nomination to the Supreme Court until after the 2016 presidential elections, which benefited the Republican Party as President Trump appointed a conservative justice to the Supreme Court. For all of the reasons we have learned throughout our lessons on Congress, power is described as fragmented or decentralized, requiring political negotiation, bargaining, and compromise. We see this through the committees and through bicameralism and regional interests and party politics all playing out in Congress. But one thing you have to remember for your AP exam is that this was the original intent of the framers of the Constitution. To set a high bar, in other words, making it difficult to pass legislation. I'm not sure that they would have predicted how high that bar has been in these days, but as James Madison said, Congress was designed to, quote unquote, defeat an excess of lawmaking, stating that too many laws was like a disease on many governments. And that concludes our lessons on the legislative branch. I know it's been a long ride, but I promise you the other branches are much quicker to cover, and we'll look at the executive branch next. But before we do, let's review. Who is in charge of preparing the budget? The executive branch. Why then do we say that Congress has the power of the purse in the budget process? Well, they have to approve the budget. The congressional role of investigating and holding hearings on the executive branch is known as oversight. These are members of Congress running for re-election. Incumbents. What is it called when representatives get special finance or money for projects in their districts? Remember, they are bringing home the bacon. Those are called pork barrel projects, sometimes referred to as earmarks or riders. What is it called when Congress members trade their votes? Logrolling. This model of representation is based on Congress members doing whatever their constituents want. Delegate representation. This model is based on them doing what they think is best for the country or for their district or voting by their opinions. Trustee representation. True or false, midterm elections have been good for the president's party? False. When one party controls the White House and the other Congress, it is known as a divided government. Divided government has led to a slowdown in the approval of presidential appointments. True or false, the framers of the Constitution wanted to make it easy to pass the laws. False. And that's it. I want to thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe because up next we are going to look at the executive branch. And just a reminder, teachers, that this PowerPoint with a wide variety of materials is available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Just click the link below this video or go to Mr. Raymond's Social Studies Academy at Teachers Pay Teachers. Again, guys, thanks for watching.